Dr. Holmstead, how are you?
I'm great. How are you, Matt?
I'm doing great, man. I was just saying, we got to start the episode. We're going to talk the whole day away. Thank you for coming in, sir. You are oh my God, you are an actual doctor. You are a member of the WWAMI program, a participant. Now you're
graduate. Yes.
Graduate. Now you're in residency, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So like you are a product of this program that we've had in Idaho for roughly like 50 years, right?
I am.
And WWAMI
100%.
is Washington, Arizona.
Washington. So it's WWAMI, WWAMI.
Washington, Wisconsin.
Washington, Wyoming.
Sorry.
Alaska, Montana, Idaho. So just think of the northwest part of the United States. That is what the WWAMI program covers. It's practically a quarter of the landmass of the United States is the WWAMI program.
Okay. Explain to me in as simple a terms as you can. Because like people are like, well, we have a partnership with these other med schools. I'm like, how do you mean? Because like, let's say my kids want to go to University of Washington for undergrad.
Yeah.
Idaho doesn't have to have a partnership with the University of Washington for my kid to apply and go there. But apparently you have to have some kind of partnership with the University of Washington for med school or something. Okay, so explain, again, like I'm 5, explain this to me.
So here's a history of the WWAMI program. It's about 52 years old. And what happened was there's all these states in the rural Northwest. None of them had an actual medical school present in their state. The only medical school in the Northwest was the University of Washington, which is a big, prestigious research university.
The Huskies. Huskies.
So the government of these respective rural states, they cut a deal with the WWAMI or with the UW at the time to create what was then the Washington, Alaska, Montana, Idaho program, WWAMI, and then Wyoming got in on it a little later.
Yeah.
So,
but we were the early adopters.
We were the early adopters, exactly. And this really was a really forward-thinking program. And what happened was back in that day, the students would spend their first 2 years in Seattle. They would study at the University of Washington as a University of Washington medical student. And then, so medical school is divided into 2 very distinct phases. And this is important to understand about medical school in general. You have a part that's behind a desk and you have a part that's in the hospital.
Sure.
We call that preclinical and clinical. So very important to distinguish between the 2 phases. The preclinical phase was all at the University of Washington. And back in that day, you would go there, study in Seattle, you'd go to the anatomy lab, you'd listen to the professor's lecture, you'd take your tests, and finally at the end of that 2 years, you'd take your board exam, your very first board exam, and then you were free to go do your clinicals.
Okay, can I ask you a question?
Yeah, let's do it.
Do you need a partnership to apply for the University of Washington? Like, I don't understand what the partnership is.
I'll get there.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I thought we skipped over it.
Oh, yeah.
I missed it or something. Okay. Just keep going. I'm going
to be quiet. So in order to apply for the WWAMI program, yes, you absolutely had to be an Idaho citizen because the Idaho government was paying at that time for 10 seats in the University of Washington Medical School.
What does that mean, paying for 10 seats?
It means
that those 10 seats were reserved exclusively for Idaho residents.
Exactly. So they're exclusively reserved for Idaho residents. They still are. I guess I'm like talking in the past, but this is still the case. It's just expanded.
Okay. So how many seats do we pay for now?
40.
Okay.
40 seats.
So Idaho does not have a medical school.
No.
Okay.
Well, we have ICOM, but that is a DO school. There's no true MD school with a teaching hospital in the state.
Okay. So we don't have an MD school with a teaching hospital. And so instead of building one of those, we said, hey, what if we could just acquire seats at a neighboring really high quality research facility like University of Washington? So we have an X number of seats, let's say roughly 40 seats at the University of Washington that are exclusively reserved for Idaho applicants. Now, once those seats fill up, somebody in Idaho could still apply to University of Washington, not through the WWAMI program. They could just apply as like, hey, I'd just like to get into your med school, but they're not going to get the benefit of the WWAMI program and having the reserved seats.
Correct. So they do that 40 seats with the WWAMI program. There's 10 seats reserved also at the University of Utah. Also came a little bit later, that partnership.
Gotcha. Okay, so we have seats here, we have seats there, and this is in the absence of our own Idaho medical school. So we're like, hey, I ain't building a building. They already got the building. Let's just get seats in their building or their building. Yes. And that way we can train doctors as if we have our own medical school.
Yeah, in one of the top medical institutions in the entire country.
Gotcha. So with those 40 seats, then if I'm apply for the WWAMI program, I'm not competing against the general populace. I'm only competing against the other Idaho people that are applying to medical school.
That's
so
correct.
If there are 50 people applying for the 40 seats at University of Washington, I just got to be top 40. I got to be better than those 10 guys or gals, whoever. And then I get in. I don't have to go into the onslaught of the general admission for University
And it is an onslaught. Yeah. In fact, those students that you mentioned, the students who are sort of outside of those reserved seats, only like top tier, like top 0.5% students will end up competing for those spots. I mean, they're very, very coveted spots.
And those are people from the
entire
rest
country,
of the world.
Yes,
right. Like this is not reserved. The people that can apply to UW has no reservation even within our country borders. Like you could be in Canada trying to become a medical student in Washington or wherever.
It is in fact one of the premier medical institutions in the world.
Okay,
that's a fact.
Bottom line is, the WWAMI program allowed us to gain assured entrance into one of the top medical programs in the world.
Yes.
And reserve a giant chunk of seats for our Idaho medical students as if somehow we had like our own school here that was fantastic and reserved only for Idaho people.
Yes. And now what happens, see, we've evolved from that time now. So students actually have the opportunity to spend almost their entire clinical and preclinical training in the state of Idaho. Used to be that you would go to Seattle for your preclinical training, and then you would mostly kind of stay in Seattle for your clinical training, and you'd kind of rotate a little bit through Idaho as we had clinical sites available. And now what happens is we have this amazing site that we built up at the University of Idaho. So University of Idaho is now partnered with the University of Washington. And our WWAMI students, they spend their preclinical years at the University of Idaho. And those are like the first 2 years, or in WWAMI's case, 18 months. And it's the same for every single rural state that's involved in the WWAMI program. So the Montana students are at, I think it's Montana, University of Montana, something like that. And Alaska's at University of Anchorage. And there's also a spot in Gonzaga that was recently opened, I think back in like 2016.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're from Middleton, Idaho.
I am.
And you apply for the WWAMI program.
Yes.
And you truck yourself over to the depressing state of Washington and go to University of Washington.
I applied at the University of Idaho. That was where my interview was.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
No, but I meant you went to school at university.
So I did. So I went to my undergraduate at BYU.
Okay. And then you went to UW for medical school.
Yes.
Okay.
Exactly.
And now, and that was your preclinical, right?
Yes.
Okay. Where did you do your clinical?
So that's the important distinction about the WWAMI program. So just to give you an understanding of a regular medical school before I explain how WWAMI is different, because I think that's important to understand. So a regular medical school, let's say for instance, the University of Utah, it's all in Salt Lake City, right? So you do your preclinical, it's all at the Salt Lake City campus. And then when you start your clinical rotations, you're rotating at the Huntsman Hospital down there. Okay. At the Huntsman Center. And, University of Utah, their giant, enormous medical complex there. So when you're rotating, so you do your different rotations through the different specialties. So when you're doing your internal medicine rotation, you're rotating internal medicine at the University of Utah, surgery at the University of Utah, psychiatry at the University of Utah. So here's how the WWAMI program is different. So we all do our preclinicals at our different respective sites in the WWAMI program. And then our clinical education, it opens up. We have the opportunity of going anywhere in the WWAMI region. We're talking a quarter of the landmass of the United States and some of the most rural country in the entire United States, including the state of Alaska, Montana, Idaho, Wyoming, And so personally, here's what happened to me. So I was an Idaho tracker. So I chose to do most of my rotations right in the state of Idaho. So I got to rotate with our partnerships at St. Luke's. I was at West Valley Hospital. I was at St. Alphonsus. I was at the VA. But I also got to spend time in Harborview Medical Center, which is one of the #1 trauma centers in the world, and I got to see some absolutely insane stuff, like,
Wow.
bullet wounds, fixing bullet wounds and getting chests ripped open right in front of me, running codes, that sort of thing.
Wow.
And then I also got to go to, one of my rotations was in a rural Alaskan fishing village. I was on an island. It's called Petersburg. And I was there right when the salmon were running. So I'd go to the clinic and the hospital. I'd be on call for the hospital. And in my spare time, I'd be out catching silvers in the slough. And
my dad came out as a general surgeon and then did a hand fellowship as well, and then also did a bariatric surgery. But when he was doing hand surgery up in Alaska, he lived in Anchorage for about 25 years.
Awesome.
He would have people that came in during the fishing season, and they'd have like some mangled hand, like some just terrible.
Oh yeah, fishing injuries.
And they would literally say, like, put a waterproof cast on my hand and let me go. It's like, dude, we gotta get like an OR set up. Like, you are really jacked up. He's like, listen, I make 3/4 of my annual income in the next week and a half.
Yeah.
I'm leaving right now, whether or not you put a cast on. He's like, okay, hang on here, buddy.
Like,
put it on. It's like, they come back 2 weeks later with 3/4 of their income. Yeah. And like, then they're like, do whatever you got to do now. And it's like, got to re-break bones and everything. It's like,
I had a patient who would spend 6 months fishing. Then he'd spend 6 months in Mexico with his wife that he met, also fishing, who's from Mexico. Oh. And they built like a mansion down in Mexico. So he just fishes, and then he basically parties for 6 months of the year.
Comes back
with his family. Tan. Oh yeah. With his family down in Mexico.
Dude, the people in Alaska are like,
they're hardcore.
They're hardcore. Like, if you're going to hang out up there, I went, when I was in college, I went up there and spent a summer up there. And I was like, oh, I'll go on like a mountain bike ride, whatever. My dad like gets me this mountain bike. I'm like riding around this mountain bike, and I'm going up, these fire trails and just whatever. Not even that far outside of Anchorage, like just in it's like off the neighborhoods. And I got stuck in this patch of mud, and I was like riding. I was like, because it's really rugged up there. I get stuck in this mud, and my tires. I'm like, oh no! I start getting off my bike, and I look down, and my arm's covered in mosquitoes. Oh, like they're like the size of your. They just. Boom. And I was like, it was like a horror movie, right? Like my arm just turned black, and then there was like blood. Oh, it was terrible. And I couldn't get my bike to go because it was stuck in this mud. So I literally had to pick up my bike and I started running down this trail. So like my bike, and the mosquitoes like, different place. Anyway, so you spent some time up there.
Yeah. And I also was able to spend time in Montana. So my training, and this is, WWAMI is the envy of the country. I mean, it really is. I've gone to national conferences everywhere.
Dude, and 40 spots in the one of the most coveted medical schools ever. Like,
it really is.
That's a sweet get up.
No exaggeration. I mean, so I've gone to national conferences, and we just sweep the board in terms of awards every time. Like, it's like University of Washington School of Medicine, WWAMI program, get up here, And I mean, it's really a spectacular thing. And no other medical school gets that kind of training. Like, no medical school gets they either spend their time in a #1 trauma center, maybe they'll get like a rural rotation or two, but like the type of training that we get is phenomenal and is so unique. It's so unique in terms of medical training, and we're really highly sought after as residents.
Okay. So talk to me about the residency, because this is a piece that, again, I never will and never did go to medical school. God bless you for doing it. This is another arduous piece of, becoming an actual doctor where you can practice. You have to do residencies, but this is another piece of the learning step where you are hands-on, people are relying on you, but you're not out on your own, and you have to go places where there are people that are willing to take you and mentor you and help you. It's like, it's part of the system.
Yes.
And we have limited residency spots with limited specialties here. We have 0 residency spots for things like OBGYNs.
Yes.
Right?
Correct.
And some people would argue that we have less favorable legislation or laws based around OBGYNs. Mm-hmm. Okay. Now look, that's just what people tell me.
Yeah.
So
we are losing OBGYNs right now.
We're losing OBGYNs, and we also can't homegrown our own from a residency standpoint.
Correct.
Right. So we
are relying on people coming back from other states, and many of those people that are coming back from other states are people from the WWAMI program who trained as WWAMI doctor, who trained as through the WWAMI program as medical students, attended residencies elsewhere, and are still coming back.
How free? If you do a residency program somewhere, what are the odds that you're going to come back? Like, is Idaho better at attracting people to do residencies elsewhere and getting them back in? Or does Idaho retain more people? Like, say I do a residency in Arizona and it's like 50% chance that I stay in Arizona when I do the residency there, versus I do a residency in Idaho and it's like 65% chance that I stay here if I do the residency here.
Yeah, I don't know the specific numbers like per state.
Gotcha.
But I will say that nationally, you are much, much more likely to stay in the spot where you train in your residency. So if we really want to keep doctors in the state, what we need are residencies. And traditionally, our through the WWAMI program, we have a really high retention rate. Even doctors who are forced to go outside of the state of Idaho to train in medical specialties that we just don't have residencies for here, they still end up coming back to the state and practicing. We have just a hugely successful retention rate. I think it's like 51%. Even of the specialties who leave and train other places and are likely to stay there but still come back. And then if you count the other states in the WWAMI program who are rotating through the state of Idaho, and we essentially recruit them when they come through, and they're like, I really like Idaho. Idaho is awesome.
You're like, I know, bro.
Yeah,
check out Middleton.
Yeah. Middleton. Go Vikes. And the retention is something like 71%, which is just astronomical. So it's a hugely successful program that's been working really well for us.
So bottom line is the WWAMI program allows us to get all of the benefits of guaranteed medical school students at a world-class spot and get the benefits of the rotations, clinical and resident rotations all throughout the neighboring and partnered states.
Yes.
And also rotates people that wouldn't otherwise necessarily be exposed to Idaho. They rotate them through Idaho as well, which attracts more people because you want to hang out in the rain in Seattle all day or like hang out in Middleton. You know, it's like, so we get more exposure and more essentially capacity to attract doctors back to Idaho.
Exactly. That's exactly right, Matt. And so what you described, that's the WWAMI program. It's a huge, this
is why it's been so confusing to understand.
Yes.
There's a lot going on here.
Yeah, it is a hugely complex program, and I've explained it to my family like 1,000 times, and they still don't understand. So I don't expect anybody to understand all of the dynamics of the WWAMI program like in one shot, right? Yeah. But just to understand that it is a very complex program, but it's worked extremely well, and it's popped out some really high quality doctors. Maybe I'm the exception, but all of my colleagues are fantastic, and the doctors that we've produced in the state of Idaho are really great. And I think so.
And like, we need more of that, right?
Exactly.
Like, we are 50th or something out of 50 or 51, depending if you count territories and stuff. But like, we are at the bottom for medical practitioners to population ratio. We are the worst.
50th. Like, you don't get lower than 50th.
Like, we're talking just the continental United States.
We're not at 51st. Anyway, Matt.
Well, aren't we worse than Puerto Rico? Like, if we're a territory?
I don't know. I don't know the question of that. That would be interesting.
God damn it, man.
So
I thought you had these answers.
Sorry. Like, I don't know population dynamics.
Right. So, but the bottom line is, like, we need to do something to increase numbers. Like, I had a situation in my family recently, and everything has worked out. But I had a situation recently where I needed to see a very specialized pediatrician, and Idaho does have them, 2 of them. They were booked up 4 months out.
So
now, this particular situation, when you're dealing with a child, when you're dealing with your child, and you're worried, you're like, 4 months,
too long.
Like 1, 2, 3, 4, right? Yeah. And that situation led to this whole diving down this rabbit hole of like, okay, well, we're not waiting 4 months. That's crazy. And led to us getting a hold of different medical establishments, like got a hold of Stanford, got a hold of, Salt Lake, got a hold of a bunch of different places that we were all able to get a spot with way sooner. Then the question becomes, what's your coverage? Because are we going out of network? Is it in network? Do we have to prove that we tried within the state of Idaho, but we couldn't get somebody within a reasonable time frame? Who's determining what that time frame is? Like I got 3 kids, right? So if we're going, like, do we bring help? Do we have in-laws come here and we travel? Like, all of these things started happening. And it was like the specialist that we needed to see isn't like an obscure, crazy one. It's like, no. This is like a specialist that is totally understood to exist for pediatricians. Anyway, that's a problem. That's a real thing.
Yeah. And Matt, I don't think anybody disagrees that we have it bad here in Idaho in terms of physician and ratio in the state.
The physicians are not to blame. Let's be clear.
Exactly.
Like, I'm not blaming you. We just need more of you.
Yeah. And that's some of the controversies surrounding the WWAMI program right now. Is there's some ideas out there that if we left the WWAMI program and we went with, if we tried other alternative programs, that we would get more doctors in the state. And wait,
what are the alternative? Okay, help me understand this. Because somebody has said, if we leave, I have heard this.
Yes.
And I'm like, I don't fully understand WWAMI, but I definitely don't understand what you're saying. So first off, do we need to leave the WWAMI program in order to engage with like more conversations about more medical schools?
That's what people are wanting to do. The short answer that I would say is we shouldn't, but some people want to, for reasons both political and financial, they want to end our partnership with UW and try and search for other options that will be more politically and culturally resonant with the state of Idaho, and also that will be more financially beneficial for the state of Idaho. Yeah.
You have very clearly illustrated our worldview with WWAMI.
Yes.
Okay. Or our world state.
Fantastic program.
This is fantastic program. Okay, great. And like this number of seats and blah, 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 like the whole thing. Okay. What's the alternate worldview where they're like, okay, let's sever ties with WWAMI and let's engage in like commie, which is California, Oregon, and Montana. Like, I don't know, Montana, Idaho. How I did that? I made that on the fly. Commie, California, Oregon, Montana, Idaho. That would be hilarious if that's a thing.
Oh dear. I don't think Idaho or Montana would be okay with that.
What does Montana do? They're not in WWAMI.
They are.
Oh, excuse me. They are. They're the M. I kept thinking W.
Oregon is like the Northwest state that's not part of WWAMI.
Okay, so let's say we do, what's the alternative?
So let me like just tell you the story, how this happened, kind of from the beginning. Let me really steelman them because I understand where they're coming from, right? We're all coming from a space where we want more doctors in Idaho. So here's what happened. So first you have to understand that medical school is divided up into 2 distinct phases, right? There's a preclinical phase, there's a clinical phase. In the WWAMI program especially, there's a curtain drawn between the two. Like the two are very different. Okay. So we do our preclinicals up at the University of Idaho. And the folks up at University of Idaho have done a fantastic job at making our preclinical experience amazing. So, and they butted heads with UW a lot over that. Because to UW, the most important phase is the clinical phase. And they're right. But unfortunately, the preclinical education, especially with the WWAMI program, they just weren't getting the right funding. They weren't getting a lot of, they were really just starting to get the shaft from UW. So the folks up there, they fought really hard. They raised all their own money. They built a big, beautiful campus, a big, huge, beautiful building, an amazing state-of-the-art anatomy lab. They hired great faculty. And I
had a buddy who was an instructor.
Yes.
Up there.
And they're fantastic. I love all the folks up there at the Idaho WWAMI. And they've just like kudos to them. They have created a beautiful campus and thriving spot. And so when that's all you see, and you've only been butting heads with UW for a long time in order to create that, I completely understand thinking, well, we could do this better without UW if we cut ties from UW.
Okay, but again, you're just at that big, beautiful campus. You're just doing preclinicals.
So unfortunately, there's that curtain between the two.
Okay.
Right. And so the idea was, in order to maintain our clinical rotations in the state of Idaho, we would still need a clinical partner. And in order to provide good like preclinical medical education and curriculum, we'd still need a good clinical partner. And so some ideas were floated out there. One of the ideas was University of Utah. And part of that was financial. It was like, we pay a lot of money to UW and not a lot of that money comes back. Well, like 40, 45% of that money comes back to the state of Idaho. The rest goes to the University of Washington and the clinical experiences throughout the WWAMI region. And the University of Utah said, we'll give you a better deal. We'll flip that on its head. We'll send more money back into Idaho. And we're like, well, that sounds pretty good. And then from a political standpoint, it was UW is teaching abortion, and the state of Idaho is not okay with students being taught abortion.
If I may say something real fast.
Yeah.
That's not true if you recognize that in the case of the life of a mother,
Yes.
rape, and incest, abortion is 100% acknowledged as a viable, legitimate medical
Emergency.
procedure.
Yes.
Okay. Now, we do not like elective abortions,
Yes.
right? And fine. Totally.
Yeah.
I'm not here to discuss that with anyone, but let's be very clear. If your wife or my wife were pregnant and all of a sudden it became clear that her life was at risk and we needed to terminate her pregnancy, you better have somebody who can do that world class instantaneously. So I understand the like, hey, we don't like this procedure under this set of circumstances.
Yeah.
Fine. But under this set of circumstances, you better be world class, baby.
Yeah,
you
yeah,
better
yeah.
be on point, no questions asked.
Yeah. So I'm not going to open that can of worms with
Yeah,
you,
let's
Matt,
not do
'cause-
that. Let's not.
But
I'm
yeah.
just saying, like
Yeah.
under our current legislation, like this is what we have established that
Yeah.
we absolutely have this carve out for these things, and we need people that can do it very well for this reason, right? Like we're not arguing for any other application.
Yeah.
I'm
So
not even arguing for that application. I'm just observing that that's the legislation in
yeah.
place.
So, and that's the thing is that there's this kind of, I guess, a little bit misunderstanding about
Right.
medical education.
Right.
Because at the University of Washington, no one was being forced to perform abortions. And at any school, anywhere in the country, any medical school are learning about abortions.
Yes.
They're learning, like getting the overview, like what needs to happen in order to make that happen. Nobody's getting taught specifically, being forced specifically to learn how to do
Right.
it. But everybody needs to be familiar, number one, because it's going to be on our board exams. If we want to become resident physicians, if we want to become doctors, we have to pass our board exams. We have to know these things. And that's just that. University of Utah will teach it. ICOM will teach it. Any school will teach it. And
Right, so ICOM teaches it as well.
yes.
Okay, so we don't want to go to UW because they teach abortions, but ICOM teaches abortions.
Yeah. So that's
Okay.
the whole thing. And
Okay.
and the other part
That's the
was
thing.
the other part was there was concern that Idaho funds were being used to pay for abortion training. And the Idaho state government didn't want that. So potentially what's happened since that whole thing is it's all just a big misunderstanding because Idaho funds are not used to pay for abortion training. There's been an amendment signed to the contract and they never did in the first place. So that was all just a big misunderstanding, but it was part of the rationale of let's go somewhere else.
So
yeah.
they theoretically could have gotten a better return from the University of
Yes.
Utah.
Yes.
They culturally were teaching, they weren't teaching, excuse me, the abortion thing doesn't really make sense either because University of Utah does it.
Yeah.
Okay, so University of Utah is no different than University of Washington. regarding that.
Essentially, no.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Anyway.
But
okay, great.
It was a
That was the idea.
It was
So-
a cultural perception that University of Washington is a bastion of liberal thought, right?
Okay.
And the University of Utah maybe is not.
Okay. Now,
But
let's even run down that road. Okay. So we want
Yeah.
more doctors. Okay. If that's our stated goal, I don't really care about culturally, but like if that's our stated goal, we want more doctors. So let's say we got 40 seats at UW. Okay. And we have a certain number at University of Utah.
Currently 10. Yeah.
Currently 10. Were they going to up that to be like 60 seats?
And
Like,
that was the idea.
Okay.
They were going to, we have no guarantee at this point. There's no guarantee. There's some movement in the legislature. There's been some things that have been put through the legislature that have said, sure, well, like it's in the legislature, but nothing has been passed. Like there's nothing on paper.
okay. So they're saying maybe.
Maybe.
And they're like,
they
"Well, you wanna-
they
let's-"
say they signed a memorandum of intent or something like that, which is to say 2 thumbs up.
It's like the scene from Jerry Maguire when he like gives him the handshake and it's strong as oak, and then he signs the contract. That's I really like it in writing. Just something to say we're all on the same page that I can hold in front of the judge in the event that it ever comes to that.
Yeah, unfortunately, confidence is no contract. Yeah.
Let me ask you something. If they came back with a signed document being like, hey, you currently have 10 seats at University of Utah. We'll give you 100, and here's it in writing.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have, I know you're a product of the WWAMI program,
Yes.
God bless it. Would you have a criticism of it there? It's like, okay, wait, we're getting more money to the state of Idaho, and we're actually getting more seats? Like, that's good. Is that something where you'd be like, hey, this is a good idea?
Yeah, so that's really why I wanted to steel man this argument, Matt, to show where everybody's coming from. Like, this makes sense, right? It makes sense to come from that angle.
Sure.
But what I really want to, like, here's the crux of the issue, okay, is the clinical training.
Okay.
It's the clinical training that is the meat of your education, like I was saying. It's what really makes an education in your medical education. It is not the preclinical years. They're pretty standardizable. You could honestly do it online. Like the resources are out there to study and train for the first board exam.
Okay.
A lot of students don't even go to lectures, like they just study. And that's universal. So ICOM, University of Utah, University of Washington, whatever, New York, right? You're going to be studying you have basically the same education in your preclinical years.
Right.
And where the rubber hits the road in terms of what makes or breaks a medical education is your clinical years.
Okay.
And what WWAMI has built in the state of Idaho over the last 52 years is a network of physicians, of WWAMI doctors training WWAMI doctors, training WWAMI doctors, who have created this network that is this huge amount of sites that are really high quality sites. All of them are University of Washington faculty, get University of Washington faculty development training. And that's just like helping them know how to teach a medical student effectively. This is not like indoctrination training, right? This is how you replicate.
I'm a dermatologist.
Yes.
I'm a blank. Blank. Like this is my specialty. This is how you do this.
Yeah, this is how you replicate the success that the University of Washington has had in producing some of the best primary care doctors in the nation. So you have that access to all of those resources, and you're a UW graduate yourself. Many of these doctors are WWAMI graduates, and now they're passing it along. And none of them are required to. None of them are required to do this in the state of Idaho. And so the concern, the big concern is if we decided to sort of just transfer, plug and play over to the University of Utah, and that's just one of the options that's been floated around, then the preclinical training phase would be fine. It really would. The clinical phase would utterly break down.
Okay. And in the absence of that, in the absence of secured clinical options, this is where it's like, okay, you don't have doctors. Like you can get through the studying phase, but when you have to go hands-on somewhere, this is what actually makes you a functional doctor.
This is what actually makes you into a functional doctor.
And right now, under the WWAMI program, we have secured spots for our clinical rotations.
Decades in the making. And these are very, very difficult to create and do effectively, right? Because you can ask a doctor, you can say, hey, can you take my medical student? And they will. And someone will say, okay. But without the proper training and without a long time in that position, it's really difficult to get a good clinical experience. So for instance, I could shadow a doctor. I can do that as a middle schooler. Right. I can go follow a doctor around, see what he does, sit in the room with the patients with him. But unless I'm getting responsibility, unless I'm being respected and valued and integrated into the system, I am not learning the way that I need to learn. And a lot of these students, like especially for ICOM, for instance, when they're getting into these rotations that they've had to build sort of from scratch, that they're bad rotations. They're bad rotations. They just shadow. They don't learn the way that they're supposed to learn. They don't learn to present. They don't learn to critically think about things the way that they're supposed to. They're not given the responsibility to stand out there on the edge and learn from their failures and mistakes. So I'm telling you, the difference between a good rotation and a bad rotation is immense. And that's the difference between a good medical education and a bad medical education. So, and what I'm saying is that those clinical rotations in the state of Idaho that have been built over the decades are really good. And they exist on a wish and a prayer. It is the relationships that have been built over 50 years. And a lot of those doctors who are WWAMI grads themselves are saying, no way, I'm not going to go with some unproven school with, I love my medical students from the University of Washington. I wish they were from Idaho. I really do. But this is a recruiting opportunity for us too. This is when we see medical students that are really high quality, we want them. We try and get them to stay, and many of them do.
Okay. But University of Utah is not like a new medical school, right?
Yeah.
Like they're part of the WWAMI program as well already?
Yeah.
Okay. So,
well, no. Sorry. University of Utah is not part of the WWAMI program.
Okay. What's the part in Utah that's part of the WWAMI?
None.
Oh,
so there
it's not
is
WWAMI.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's 10 students who are currently at the University of Utah. And I think that plays nicely in all this. Let me just try and explain the differences. So University of Utah, they have 10 seats that they save for
WWAMI
Idaho
people.
For Idaho students.
Oh,
not part of the WWAMI program.
Okay.
They're part of the University of Utah.
So this is like the UI partnership.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. And where do those students go for their residency?
Those students for their medical school, they go to the University of Utah and they stay all 4 years at the University of Utah.
Gotcha. That's what you explained at the beginning.
Yeah. So they stay in the University of Utah. And those students who come from Idaho, they do have one required rotation in the state of Idaho. And they find it themselves.
Got it. So, so the University of Utah is not aggressively pumping the students back in or forcing them to do rotations through Idaho. They're like
95% of their medical education is in the state of Utah.
Gotcha. So it's come on down, hang out down here, get nice and comfy, maybe meet someone, go up there for 6 months, but come on back
for 4 weeks.
4 weeks. Go up there for 4 weeks, honey. Come back. We still have your favorite hoagie. Yeah. So they essentially establish their life there. They don't ask them to travel around, as you kind of articulated, going to Petersburg Island or whatever it is in Alaska.
Yeah, they have rural rotations in Utah if they can
all
choose to go to. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So
they have
this
not
seems
aggressively
like
expanded their network into Idaho. They don't. They don't have a network in Idaho.
Okay. So if we had listen, it's all good. It's all good. So the bottom line is, if we did the Steelman alternative, which is, look, they're going to give us 100 seats at University of Utah. It's going to be great. And they have residencies. Hundreds of them. They have 100 residencies.
Well,
they're all in Utah.
They're all
except
Utah.
for 4 weeks when some people have to come back.
Yeah.
So if we make the gross assumption that where people go to medical school and then do their residencies are generally where they hang out, then we'd kind of be like a big net loss to Utah.
I think yes. I think disrupting the WWAMI. I mean, let's dive into that a little bit. So the WWAMI, the WWAMI program right now is bringing a lot of doctors back to Idaho post residency. So even when they're leaving the state, they're still coming back to the state of Idaho. And who's to say that wouldn't happen if they went to Utah, right? Say they open up 100 more spots. Problem is, in Idaho, if we want students rotating in Idaho and staying in Idaho to do their training and building networks and connections here in the state, then we need clinical rotations in Idaho. And one of the other criticisms of the University of Washington was the Idaho State Legislature asked them a few years ago. They said, give us 10 more spots. And UW said no. And so they're like, oh, well, we asked for more seats. They wouldn't give it to us. Let's go somewhere else. That was kind of one part of the rationale. And what they didn't understand was going behind the curtain. It's just a misunderstanding again, because UW was perfectly willing to open 10 more seats up at the preclinical sites. But before you have those medical students, you have to have the clinical training sites. And we wanted to have those clinical training sites in Idaho because we want space in Idaho so that if every single student, WWAMI student, wanted to rotate in the state of Idaho, they could, because we want them here. And we didn't have the sites. And WWAMI, who has had these relationships for 50 years, after the pandemic, a lot of places closed down their sites. So we're rebuilding these connections, and we're saying, just give us a little time. This is hard. Building these relationships is hard. We're building them out, and we just didn't have the clinical sites. And that's why those spots couldn't open. So say we send 100 students over to the University of Utah. That's great, but they're going to stay in Utah because we still won't have the sites. And if we break from the WWAMI program, we will have a lot less sites in Idaho. So not only will the quality of that education be decreased, because we've shot down a lot of our most valuable clinical training opportunities. The quantity will be decreased also.
So if we want more doctors in Idaho, sounds like that's a less favorable option.
It's a less favorable option, Matt. If we want more doctors in this state, what we need is a teaching hospital. We need a teaching hospital in Idaho, and that is a long-term plan.
I had an experience with a teaching hospital. When I was 28, I was at the trampoline gym, preparing for my brother-in-law's 30th birthday, where we were going to rack a bunch of 10-year-olds in dodgeball.
I love that.
Yeah, I love that for me. Love that for 28-year-old me.
Watching slow motion, their faces just crushed by the dogs.
Like dumb, and the kids would have killed us. We never made it to the tournament because of what happened. So I was practicing a double front flip into the foam pit. Don't ever go into the foam pit. And I'm a committed man, right? So I keep almost getting all the way over. So I get around once and I get around 3/4. I keep landing on my back. It's like without getting my feet all the way. I'm like, dude, I just got it. Cause I kept opening up. I would get scared. I was like, so finally I'm like, you know what? I gotta be all in. I can't untuck. Don't untuck. Just stay tucked the whole time. You will make it all the way over. So I launch myself. Just I'm in tight as a ball. And I go flipping over, and I do make it over. But what I didn't realize is the foam pit's only 4 feet deep, and I'm now 180-pound cannonball coming down. So I bottom out
times 5.
I bottom out in the bottom of the foam pit and on my feet because I made it all the way over.
And my fully rotating.
So my foot bottoms out, which drives my knee directly up. Now I'm hugging my knees. And my right knee comes across my body and smashes my nose onto the side. I look like Toucan Sam with a lopsided nose. And I'm like, I'm bleeding like a leaky faucet. And I was like,
all over that poor foam pit that's all got norovirus.
Oh my God, 100%. And I'm trying to get out. Now, mind you, I'm trying to hold my nose and crawl out. You've been a foam. It's really hard to get out. Okay, so I finally make my way over. I'm bleeding like this. And I get out, and the teenager with freckles and pimples is staring at me. He's like, is there blood in the foam pit? I was like, I think so.
Primary concern.
And no joke, 30 seconds later, kid jumping off the trampoline into my blood.
Oh, that's so funny.
And so I'm sitting there, like on the side of the foam pit against the wall. I'm like, I got to break my nose back. I was like, I could do this because my friends are like, oh. And so I was like, give me my wallet. They're like, your wallet? I'm like, hang on. I just bite down on my wallet. I was like, I got this. I'm trying to break it over. They're like, dude, stop. We'll just take you to the hospital. So we're in Sacramento because that's where my sister lived. And they drove me to UC Davis Teaching Hospital, right? Nice. So we go to the teaching hospital. And we get there, go to the emergency room. And the person getting me, they're like, what's the problem, sir? I was like, my nose. She was like, well, did it look like that before? I was like, no, lady, it didn't. So I'm sitting there.
Do you have a sideways nose before, Matt?
Dude, it was literally, my skull was pointing out on my skin. Actually, funny. I had to get stitches here because my skull was coming out.
That's amazing.
Right? Yeah, it was amazing. Anyway, so we finally get back there after 3 or 4, just listen to this. After 3 or 4 hours, we get back there and they're like, okay, so here's the deal. We're going to get you lined up for an OR and, we'll go from there. I was like, can't you just break it back? And this is an MD, an MD student. She was like, I mean, yeah. It's like, great, because we got a halibut at home. I gotta go. And she's like, okay, well, we gotta shoot your face up and numb you and stuff. I was like, cool, are we doing that now? Or she was like, okay. So they bring
that medical student is probably terrified and excited.
This is the thing, dude. This is the thing. So the first off, she's like, all right, I gotta get all the nerves in your face. I was like, okay, cool. She's like, you have a lot of nerves in your face. I'm like, okay, cool. And she's like, and I have to go through your mouth. I was like, what? So she's literally like, she's got to get she's going
infraorbital foramen.
There it is.
Yeah.
Going into my skull. And I hate needles anyway. They pump me up with morphine. I'm like, oh my God. So we finally get there. And I had asked him, I was like, what kind of tool do you use to break the nose back? She's she's like, we use a thing that looks like the end of a spoon. I was like, oh, wow. Like, who came up with that? That's wild. And I'm still awake, which you never are when this happens. So they bring out, like, my wife is there. I'm holding her hand. They bring out the sterile kit. They unroll it. And it's literally a 1/8 spoon. I was like, so when you said like a spoon, you meant, she's like, it's a spoon. It's a spoon. So it's these 2 medical students and like the old, gray guy. Poking his head down.
He's like, hey, you guys want to do this?
And dude, and they're like, all right, so this is what we're going to do. We're going to take this and we're going to ram it up your nose and I'm going to pull it out and he's going to push it over. And I was like, okay. And this was the funniest moment of my entire life. They're like, just say when. And I was like, you mean, they're like, whenever you're ready.
These students were terrified, Matt. They were shaking.
They were like, whenever you're ready.
Oh yeah. They were like, I can't believe I'm going to do this to a person who's alive.
And I was like, okay, yeah, go, I guess. And
they'd never done this before.
Never done this. And they'd never done it to anybody awake, right? So the woman medical student who I think was like older than the other guy, she puts her hand on my forehead. She's like, all right, hang on.
She has no idea the pressure to give.
Shaking.
She just like
she's got the spoon up and I'm like, and she's
my
like,
brain.
She's like, okay, go. And she's pulling and he's over there, like his hands shaking. Cause he's like, and she's like, push it over. It's like crack. And the whole time I'm like, oh, and as it breaks back into place, all of a sudden this like reservoir of blood starts going down the back of my throat. I'm like, I'm like choking.
You're choking on your blood.
Yeah. And so they like stop and they back up. They're like, is it? Maybe one more time. I was like, oh my God. So they crack it again. They rub it full of stuff. I was like, this was one hell of a day. I was not expecting. Go home. I get sick because all the morphine, whatever. They got all this stuff stuck on my nose. I go back in a week because they're like, you got to come back to get stitches out. We'll make sure your nose is fine.
Yeah.
And I go back and I find out upon going back, I was like, hey, I'm Matt. I'm here for the nose thing. They're like, you're the guy. Because apparently nobody had ever done that.
You traumatized those medical students. And I bet you the attending was like, back in my day in the 80s, we used to, whatever. Like just watching them.
Yeah, but like, it was like nobody ever does it awake. I was like, well, I had halibut. I had to get home. Dude, it was lit. Like that was my experience with the teaching hospital. We were all better people for it.
Yeah, I've got some stories like that from the University of Washington.
I bet you.
I was in the emergency room post Super Bowl 2023. It was epic. It was an epic night. Yeah, so many drunk people.
Okay.
Oh,
do you want to tell me one now or next time you come on?
Well, I'll just give you the long and short of it. Was one of
by the way, that whole story that I just told you, stone sober. There was no alcohol involved at all. That's the kind of cloth I'm cut from.
I was gonna say you would be shocked at how drunk people can injure themselves, just the most innocuous ways. Like this dude was walking down the stairs. And he stepped wrong, just stone cold drunk, stepped wrong. And instead of his ankle turning inward, it turned outward.
Oh, God.
Oh, I'm not going to describe what happened. But basically, it was the squeeze. I shouldn't go into this story on the air. People are going to get. My sister would kill me if I described what.
You know what? I'm no longer shocked by people's injuries because my wife and I engage in a weekly ping pong tournament on a mini ping pong table. We have a 6-foot ping pong table.
Nice.
It's only about this wide.
That's really hard.
Dude, you have to own every inch of that table. Like it's hard to slam because you don't have much space to wind up. Like
6-foot ping pong. That's
6-foot ping pong is really, you can't hit too hard. You can't get too aggressive because you got a tiny.
This is not pickleball.
No. And we have both almost blown out our knees and backs playing this game because this is the other thing. You don't have a lot of time. So your reactions are like, they have to be twice as fast. I played on a regular ping pong table like a month ago. I was like, this is a joke. Like you can see the ball arch, like you got all kinds of time. It's like normally it's like boom, 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 boom. like,
dude,
and,
you're training your brain for some insane reflexes.
dude, I do. I have this backhand, so the wife will hit it cross court, and I'll like twist to grab it, and literally I'm like, oh my god,
Every time.
It's
your poor back.
Yeah. So now I'm like, dude, we are not built like we are so fragile. So I don't know how the drunk people got hurt, but I get hurt playing ping pong.
Maybe you should surround your ping pong table with the foam pit.
We fall on the floor. We take the fall. It's not a problem. I'll take the L.
The twisting.
It's literally like you plant your foot to turn, and like from your ankle up to your knee, and then like my hamstring goes out or something. Like it's not good.
Yeah. Another.
You don't look that old yet. You're just like, trust me, when you're my age, I'm north of 40. It's brutal, man.
Well, let me tell you what. Another inordinately aggressive game that should not be as aggressive as it is. Foosball.
Oh,
foosball gets crazy.
Foosball gets wild.
Like you stab each other with like the sliding things.
Right
I've been stabbed in the groin
right in the
so
junk.
many times.
Just, I know exactly.
Oh, you're like lifting the table off the ground.
Oh my god!
Me and my
People
brothers
jumping up and down on it. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I really enjoyed playing. The cool thing about foosball, I really enjoyed that. I had a foosball table when I was a kid. The cool thing about foosball is you can get somebody who's 5 playing along somebody who's
totally.
50,
and they totally get lucky. And
you can
absolutely.
If you're the older person, you always play the defensive pair, and the younger person plays the offense. But like you can play a real game. You're never playing ping pong with a 5-year-old.
No way.
Like the foosball is the great equalizer, and as long as you have like a young person, old person, you can have like a super aggressive game. And then you're just going for the W Hail Marys from the goalie all the way on the end. You're just rotating your right hand. We also have a no spin rule, so you
have to implement that rule if you want any sort of not chaotic, absolute chaos of a game.
Man, I love
it. You have to implement the no spin rule.
I feel like we need a ping pong table, and I'm fired up now. Like we'll go slam into the walls.
I only do grown up ping pong or normal ping pong. I haven't done the 6-foot ping pong. It sounds really hard.
We have a trophy. We actually have a trophy that's a ping pong champion trophy that says Team Todd.
That's amazing.
And it alternates.
That's a treasure.
Nightstands. It alternates nightstands. From like who wins it that
way. At our family reunions, the ping pong tournament is fire.
It's the real deal.
Yeah.
I don't mean to out you. Are you part of the LDS community?
I am.
Okay, so you've been playing ping pong since you were sperm.
Oh yeah.
Okay, so you know. I have my buddy Dave, one of my dearest friends. He's in the church. He moved down to Salt Lake City in like 2019, but we were like dear friends, and his spins, like his game on ping pong and pickleball are like off the hook. It's like, Dave, what did you do?
Yeah.
Like, what did you, how did you? He's like, Mormon, bro.
Yeah, you go 2 ways, the slam or the spin.
Dude, it's wild.
And if you can combine the two, you're deadly.
Yeah.
Deadly. I'm more of a spinner. My brother's more of a slammer. So,
well, you'll have to come over and hit the 6-foot ping pong table, because I'm telling you, all you got is like spins and precise placement. Like we're hitting it off the side of the table because it's so small.
So small.
You have to own every inch. Like you just don't have the real estate to mess around. Well, I don't know how we're talking about ping pong in this episode, but God bless. Listen to me, Dr. Holmstead. H is not silent. I appreciate you, sir. Please come back and keep talking to me about the medical problems in Idaho.
I have so many ideas, Matt. So many ideas.
So many ideas. You need to be Idaho's Dr. Glaucoma. Like that's what
Glaucomflecken.
Yeah. Like with the pencil, like hanging out of his ear like this, like he's an insurance carrier.
He's super funny.
Those ones, like he's a perfect example of, you can educate people using social media, but you have to know how to make it, how to write it parallel with the greatest entertainment mechanism the world has ever seen. Like if you cannot get it like shoulder to shoulder with street food vendors from India, you'll never win. And that's what he does. Like he has some of the funniest stuff that is the most educational, but also most hilarious. Did you ever see his clip on like the X-ray, the guy who owns the X-ray machine behind the Chevron? He's ask for X-ray Mike. He's behind the Chevron. Is this covered by insurance? We don't know.
His depictions of every single specialty are uncanny. It's so funny. My favorite, I think, is his internal medicine one, where I think his character's like got the glasses and he's just like waxing long about salt in your blood. Yeah, it's like, but we have to talk about the salt.
What about when he was doing, I think, an orthopedic guy who was also a CrossFitter, who or something?
Yeah.
Like
the ortho bro.
Yes, the ortho bro.
And the ED doc who always has his bike helmet on in the classes.
Oh my God. I actually had to unfollow him because this is what I realized. Like I can't consume social media. It was like, this is sinking my life.
Yeah,
like, I can't get into this. And he was so good. I was like, I actually have to get rid of him. I can't be in a relationship with you anymore.
You're like, such a relationship with
dude.
Dr.
I did. There was one guy actually that I unfriended. And again, I don't follow anyone anymore because I don't have any time.
Yeah.
Except there's one account on street food in India. I can't let go of them.
But there was where that street food from India came.
I have an obsession. It's very unhealthy. Like
That's
if
super
you
funny.
have buckets of dirty, nasty stuff and it's street food in India, I can't look away. But there was one guy who actually was doing these dubs over Indian street food. That's how I found him. And he would do these dubs over like these ridiculous videos. This is one really interesting aspect of social media. I call this IP theft. So essentially what you do is you find a video that has already gone viral.
Yeah.
So it has done the heavy lift of figuring out the perfect special fairy dust to make it take off. And then you add something to it. That's what all the React videos are.
Yeah.
Where it's like somebody just going, oh, and it's like a green screen. But what this guy did, which I was so impressed by, is instead of just like the famous video and then a green screen over it where somebody's like, oh my gosh, and you just see them and now it's like their video, right? He would do dubs over. So he would do audio over it, kind of doing these narration funny things. So he had his own humor that he had to come up with and insert onto the video.
Yeah.
And I was like, dude, you get a cookie. Like this wins the day.
Brilliant.
And he took off because he had it just right.
That's
like
so funny.
He would say the most ridiculous things. He'd swear just enough. He had this crazy accent. I was like, dude, yeah.
The one that I always see is the guy. He's like middle-aged guy. I don't even know his name, but he just makes faces. That's it. He shows you like some clips of,
And
he's
then
like, this is from my job as a construction person. He's like dressed as a construction person.
Yeah.
And it like shows these crazy things. And then it's just him going like, like making faces and like reacting.
So that's
like, and that totally takes off. Like
it takes off. But again, that's IP theft in my mind, because essentially what you're doing is you're taking, you're compiling construction videos, right? That are like dangerous or crazy. You don't actually have any burden of coming up with those videos.
Yeah.
It's like America's Funniest Home Video. They just they aggregated the content. And then you have this guy dressed with like a hard hat on going like, oh, and then he looks to the right and he's like, oh, and then goes back and forth. Those people don't have to do anything except aggregate content that's already successful. They don't have to add any special sauce to make it good. This other guy dubbed over it and did a really good job. Like once you start looking at, once you start studying, and I've studied social media for a long time.
Yeah.
Once you start studying it, you realize very few people are making consistent, organic, original content. It's very, very hard because you just have to compete against a world of like things get upregulated, and then like how do you break through that? How do you become relevant? It's so hard, and people are we're the most discriminatory with our time and our energy that we've ever been in the history of the world. We have more people trying to get our time and energy and attention and energy. So to actually compete against that in an organic, original way is damn near impossible. Like it is so hard. It can be done.
Yeah. And when you're working for an algorithm, you really are. You rely on the algorithm, and ostensibly you're performing for people, but who you're really performing for is the algorithm, because the algorithm is going to feed you to the people that you want. And you know what? I have a whole theory about how working for being an influencer is similar to working as a doctor under insurance.
We're going to have this conversation next time. Dr. Holmstead, I really appreciate you.
Yeah.
Thank you
Thanks
for explaining
having me,
WWAMI. Please come back.
Of course. Yeah.